And you should now all see my slides. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, very good. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to this linked art workshop, which is one of two. There will be actually 4 linked art sessions over the course of the next 4 days. So you will see plenty of us and of linked art. So this session is going to be 2 hours long. And some of you might have just actually attended the CDOC CRM session just before. And it's actually by design, since the linked art workshop since the linked art initiative is actually very much inspired by the CDOC CRM. So before I introduce our speakers now, I'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the CDOC website after the conference. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll find I think a CC button, closed caption feature if you want to activate that for yourself, and you'll see the words obviously appear at the bottom of your screen. We will take questions after the end of the first hour and again at the end of the second hour. Please enter your questions in the Zoom chat or raise your hand in the chat. And when you do have a question, please identify yourself. So we do have a few speakers for you today, and I will start us off. But I'm Emmanuel Glass. I'm then the Collections and Manager for the Yale Center for British Art. We'll then have Rob Sanderson, who is Yale University's Cultural Heritage Metadata Director. And Rob will give us an introduction to the linked art model, as well as an overview of the core principles. And then we'll have Ivo Zanduis, who is with the International Institute of Social History, and he will introduce the Van Gogh Worldwide Project and its use of the linked art model. And then we'll take questions. And just to give you a sneak peek at what's going to happen in the second hour, we'll be doing some live encoding of linked art, so stay tuned for that. Please stay with us. We might take a short little break in between, but we'll look at real exemplar, real data coming from the Rijksmuseum, again with Rob Sanderson, with data provided by Edward Anderson from the Rijksmuseum. So this was an overview of what we're going to do in the next couple of hours. And if I go to my next slide, there we go. Did it change for you? Yes, okay. All right, so today I'm going to give you a brief overview of linked art. And what I will talk about, I'll talk about the linked art community, the linked art data model, and the linked art API. Throughout, I will highlight the motivations for the initiative, for the creation of linked art, and what has been achieved so far. And I'll conclude with what we plan on working on next. So what is linked art? Well, first and foremost, it's a community. It's a community of learning around linked open data, the resource description framework, and the ontology called the CDOC Conceptual Reference Model, aka the CDOC CRM. And you might have already caught the CRM workshop just before this, which is great. So linked art is really intent on trying to encourage and educate museum professionals to engage with these resources to lower the barriers of participation in linked open data initiatives. And in order to do that, linked art is fostering collaboration across professional disciplines and creating a community of scholars, technologists, ontologists, system architects, provenance experts, and metadata experts, among a few, to provide museums with the opportunity to develop their knowledge of the CDOC CRM and of the semantic web in general. The following participants are some of the many institutions, organizations, and people that have contributed to and engaged with the work of the Linked Art Initiative so far.
Manuel, sorry, could you put the full PDF screen? The people write that they see this. How we say the like diaporama. I don't know if
it should be on.
Because we see the small slides on the big slide.
Okay.
The presentation button right at the bottom. That's probably the easiest way to get to it.
How about I do this? Huh.
Now we see the blue screen.
What's that?
Now we see a blue screen.
Yeah, I've moved my screen.
Bottom.
Or the bottom from beginning, maybe if you put.
I've tried that. I don't know why. Let me try and move my screen, and then that might work.
So it's better.
Not great. Okay, let's move. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to do that.
If you if you stop sharing the screen in Zoom with it full screen already, you might be able to choose that window in the screen share.
Yep.
Yes, I think you should put the full screen before sharing your screen.
How is that? Do you see it?
We see the presenter view now.
Yes.
Oh, it worked just a minute ago, didn't it?
So now try share screen and then select the PowerPoint window.
Sorry, guys. So I'm gonna share this, but I'm not sure. Do you still not see the full screen?
Yes, but
do you have my slides? So sorry about that. I'm gonna stop sharing it. Share again. What do you see?
That's better. If you click the little present button right at the bottom next to, so there's notes and then 4 icons right at the very bottom of the PowerPoint interface, that should start it in presentation mode in the right.
I don't think I see the same thing you're seeing.
Maybe not. Right at the very bottom of the PowerPoint interface. Yep. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Yep, the next one. Next one. That one.
Did that help?
No.
No. Yeah.
That's odd. Oh, well, maybe we just keep going.
Sorry about that. It's plenty big on my screen right here, so I'm not sure what's going on. So we're on slide 5 here, the Linked Art editorial board. And so starting in January 2019, Linked Art has been supported by a number of institutions such as the Getty. It's also received grant funding from the Samuel Kress Foundation and the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And in September 2019, of course, Linked Art was made a full CDOC working group. This is that. So in addition to a community, Linked Art is also a data model. to express museum's collection description as linked open data. And to do so, we are not reinventing the wheel, but instead we're leveraging the work established by the CDOC CRM. And just like the CDOC CRM, LinkedArt is based on an event-centric organization of knowledge. The LinkedArt data model is also based on its community's experiences with past linked open data initiatives, and as a result, we are developing a shared data model collaboratively with the members of our community. Finally, the third important element of the initiative is the LinkedArt data that the LinkedArt data model comes with is in the API. And the particularity of the LinkedArt API is that we work to make it easily understandable, and so that it can be implemented easily by developers. And in a minute, Rob will go over the specifics of the API, but right now, I will just say that it's encapsulated by the acronym LOUD for Linked Open Usable Data. And the point here is to reduce the high level of effort required of technologists to develop services from RDF datasets. So to overcome that, LinkedArt offers a well-documented API with a number of recurrent principles. And because LinkedArt is a community-based, we hope that its broad adoption will make these programmatic services easier to maintain in the future. Just going to go over quickly about why we are developing LinkedArt. Really, it's to fulfill the mission of cultural heritage institutions, and we think the initiative aligns very well with the core mission of these institutions because it aims to help museums share their knowledge with large audiences. We also think it's important that cultural institutions be in control of their knowledge in the semantic web. Nobody else should be doing that for museum, and this is a great opportunity for museums to participate in the shaping of the framework and applications that disseminate their knowledge to the web. And in terms of the common approach, we deeply believe that a data model that aims to be used by multiple institutions cannot be developed in a vacuum. So the LinkedArt data model is very much a collaborative effort to find shared solution based on real data with real cases. Quickly over the status of the model, where we are right now. Here's kind of very high level list of the various components we have data modeling for, including object production, of course, but also rights and collections and sets, ownership history, and exhibitions. We are present in a number of initiatives, such as Pharos, Pre-Raphaelites Online, linked conservation data, which have started to use LinkedArt. So to conclude, here are just a few ways we'd love this audience participation in the LinkedArt initiative. You can join us on our weekly calls, working calls. There is a discussion group that you may ask to be included in, or you can even catch up on our calls by watching our famous YouTube channel, right? And we will, of course, post all of that on the website. So with that, please be in touch, tweet, retweet, like, and all the other good stuff. These are a sneak peek at the 3 upcoming LinkedArt events this week. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Rob and ask for your apologies with my little technical thing there.
Everyone, thank you, Emmanuel. Let me just share my screen, hopefully without the issues. So you now hopefully see my slide in slide mode. Yes, okay, great. Okay, so I will walk through some of the sort of principles and concepts that we have around linked art. And just move the chat to my other window. And yes, as Emmanuel said, I'm Rob Sanderson, Director for Cultural Heritage Metadata at Yale, previously at the Getty. So there's some terms that we have used, which might bear a little bit of explaining first before we get into things, such as model or ontology or vocabulary and profile. What are all these things, and where does linked art fit into this ecosystem of standards and profiles? So the model that we use is the SciDoc CRM, which gives us an abstract way to think about the world, and indeed has an RDF ontology, which is a shared format that allows us to write down that thinking in a particular way. One of the great benefits of the CRM approach is the core integration with vocabularies, which enables us to, within a very controlled methodology, extend and define the sorts of things that we're talking about. So for linked art, that is primarily artwork, but also we're looking at how non-artwork related museum content could also be integrated, perhaps at a reduced degree of functionality. So the vocabularies then give us a domain-specific set of terms, and we use Getty AAT as the primary vocabulary for that. So then linked art is a selection of aspects of the model, aspects of the ontologies, aspects of the vocabularies, and formats for describing artworks and the entities, events, and systems that interact with it. So the conceptual model, as Emmanuel had, is one of events, where events or activities are in the center. They are about, or they affect physical or information objects. So either things that you can, to use Stephen's example from the previous CRM workshop, through a window, or information objects that come from the product of human mental activity. These occur in time. They can occur in different methodologies. They have different techniques, which are types. They are performed by actors, be they groups or of people, and they occur at locations. We then further refine this as part of both the CRM and linked art to be more appropriate to the domains. So one of the principles that we have in linked art is that of progressive enhancement. So we know that not every institution can instantly start off with producing perfectly accurate, semantically rich, and standards compliant data within a certain amount of time. So instead, we are looking for a methodology that allows us to improve over time, but still participate right from the very beginning. So we have 4 different sort of layers of accuracy. The first is legacy records, where there aren't really entities, but there are just descriptions. So these are strings that are hard to interact with as a machine. They're hard to link to. It's just, here is something that if you put on a screen, a human would understand, but there is no way for they're not data. They're only text. So then comes data for humans, which is to split up those descriptions into the core CRM entities that we've just looked at, and then attach the descriptions of those entities to them, along with some basic properties. Then we look at data for machines, where we can link the entities together with more machine readable values and machine comparable or processable values. And then data for research, which is the same, but with sufficient precision and sufficient amounts of data that we can answer research questions by pulling together information from different institutions. So linked open data should be easy to use, you would hope, but by who? So one of the initial approaches was, well, it should be easy to use by humans, such as researchers. So the data comes into the machine, essentially turning money into triples, and then it goes over magically to the researcher. But instead, we think that there is an intermediary, which is the software developer. So someone has to build something that uses that data. So this is where we get that usability concept, and we add the U to the acronym to make loud. So we want the data to not only be accurate, precise, and so on, but also to be usable and thus useful. Because if it's not usable, then no one will use it. If no one uses it, then we've wasted our money in producing it. Which means that we need to have consistent and easy to work with APIs. So here is a particular statement about APIs that I think captures the sentiment pretty well. When it comes to APIs, developers are your users. The same principles of user-centered design apply to the development and publication of APIs, such as simplicity, obviousness, fit for purpose, etc. E.g., we should be looking at our data not solely from the view of how precise is it and what research can it enable, or what preservation and description of objects can it enable, but how usable is it to actually do things with. So there is, of course, a trade-off between completeness and usability. So if we have 100% coverage of all of the information that an institution knows about any particular entity, that's likely an awful lot of information. And thus, while the publisher might want to enable all of that, the developer will quickly get lost. And hence we need to make some choices about both how to represent the data and what data to represent. So we're looking for somewhere in this target zone in green between usability and completeness. So as you add completeness, initially the usability goes up because you need at least some knowledge in order to be useful. But then it sort of levels out and plateaus. We're looking to maximize the area under this curve. Right? So you want as much completeness and as much usability as possible. So we think it's somewhere in here. It's not absolutely everything that we know. It's not nothing that we know. It should be maximally usable and maximally complete at the same time. So one of the things that we've done is to adopt JSON LD as our serialization, because that is one of the lingua francas of software development at the moment. If it changes in the future, then we'll change our format. So this is linked open usable data. As a human, you can read this and see what's going on. As a machine, this converts trivially using standardized libraries into RDF for the graph for processing and querying. So I'm going to walk through the translation of this object from the Getty into linked art. We'll hit almost all of these particular fields just as an example of how this can fit together to at least see how it works in practice. So first of all, at the data for humans levels, we need to know what sort of thing we're talking about. Is it an object, a person, a place, an activity? We then need some vocabulary terms, such as being able to classify those entities to be more specific for the domain. So, there's an amphora, what's an accession number, and so on. And then we need to record that core identity, such as names, identifiers, and descriptions. So we start off with an entity, this brown guy in the middle, and it is a human-made object. So this is its class. We then give it a label, which is just a string, so that if all you get is, here is the URI, it's this type, and this is a label intended for developers to look at, you can at least understand what this URI is describing. So now we can add the object type, which is amphora. And for this, we add we use the AAT. Move the people to the bottom. So this in the CRM terms is a type or a concept. It has a label, Amphora, and it has a URI AAT 300148696. So this then adds this conceptual layer of vocabularies into the ontology layer. Okay, titles. Clearly, we need to be able to talk about titles of things. So in CRM, each title of an object is a unique name, and hence this particular name identifies this object. It could be different. There could be two different objects with the name Attic Black Figure Neck Amphora, but because this has its own URI, this name identifies this object. So now we have content, which is the actual string. We repeat the classification pattern to say that this is the primary title. So AAT 300404670, and again, this is a class. Type is again the class of the entity. In this case, it's a name. And folks who are familiar with CRM will say, there's no class name. Sanderson, what are you talking about? So in JSON LD and LinkedIn, we can map from the more technical ontological properties and labels, such as E33, E41 linguistic appellation, to something a little bit more developer friendly, in this case, name. And that's why you do not see E22, human-made object, or P1 is identified by in these slides. Instead, we use the more developer-oriented casting of those properties and class names into something that's familiar to JSON developers. We can use that same pattern to have identifiers as well as titles. So the object number, in this case, an accession number, 86, 75. The object is identified by an identifier, but it shares exactly the same pattern of data as the name, in that it has a content, 86, 75, and it's classified as, in this case, an accession number rather than a title. Dimensions, again, follows the same sort of pattern. In this case, the property is referred to by to a description, which is a linguistic object. It's classified as a dimension statement. It has some content, which is just the string 38.7 space X space 25.7 space CM, etc., etc. Okay, so now we have the sort of core descriptive knowledge as strings available as data for humans to read. But hey, it sure would be nice if we could take that dimension statement and turn it into something that machines could process. So we could split this up into 38.7, 25.7, and the notion of centimeters. This is going from strings to comparable values into our next tier of accuracy. So CRM gives us some really useful ontological language in that there is a property dimension and a class dimension, and values which can be numeric. So the object has a dimension of 38.7. There's our first one. But now we need to know what unit and what type of dimension it is. So we use AAT, which has the notion of centimeters for the unit. So now we know it's 38.7 centimeters. And again, we go back to these types to say it is 38.7 centimeters high. We can, of course, do exactly the same thing for width, duration, any other dimension that we want. So now we're getting into linking together entities rather than just core descriptions of things. So there are people, there are places, and there are times. So we'll look at the production of the object. So the object was produced by a production, which has a class of production, and it was carried out by ULAN 5000291118. Who is known as Effector. If you were to dereference this URI, you would get a lot more information about Effector. in beta testing at Getty at the moment, there is a linked Dart representation as well as the current more vocabulary focused representation. It took place at a place, TGN 7001393, which happens to be Athens, Greece, and the same. If you were to dereference that place, you would get more information about it. And it took place at a particular time span, which has a label of about 530 BC. And you would also express that as a name of the time span. It starts, or the earliest possible time is 540 BC. The end time would be 520 BC. So now we have this, we've sort of zoomed out, right, to the activity-centered pattern of the what happened, the activity, who did it, when they did it, where they did it, and what did it affect. In this case, it produced the object. So now we get into data for machines and linking across institutions. So here it's not good enough just to be on the web, to put a blob of JSON at a particular URL and then walk away. We want to be part of the web where we contribute data as a community that references other data on the web within the community. This lets us do shared cataloging because there's no need for everyone to describe everything. One of the really interesting things that Stephen brought up in the previous CRM discussion was around the documentation of the documentation. I think that's also something where we can work together because not everyone needs to fully document all of the patterns and vocabulary decisions. Instead, if we all make the same decisions, then we only need one set of metadata about what we decided to do about our processes. It also improves discovery because we have access to a lot more information about each of the entities than any one institution could possibly look after by itself. And this additional information and the connections between institutions give us better research results because we are more confident that this is something that is precise and valuable. So there's a couple of ways that this could be done. So the bars shows a visual work, which is a visual item in CRM terms, which represents a person, Theseus. So this is now outside of AAT and CRM and over to icon class. And icon class then has its own ontology and so forth. There's also about the concept of victory and armed conflict. Icon class 45A3, again, which is a type. So now that we've cataloged and described the visual content that the object shows, it happens that there is also a copy of this in the Louvre, which they have the accession number of F22. So instead of both organizations, the Getty and the Louvre, both having to fully describe their objects and then somehow link them together, instead the Louvre could simply say that it shows exactly the same visual work as the copy of the amphora at the Getty. There's also another one in the British Museum. So even if they did all fully catalog the objects, at least if they had the same identities here, we'd be able to connect them together at the graph, at the web layer, to know that there are 3 copies rather than having to search through the thousands of museums to find them. So I think we are reasonably on time. So thank you for your attention. And in the next hour, Edward and I will sort of do that at less hurried pace and working through each of those particular patterns and ideas to see how this can really be done in a practical sense, and to, I would say, prove that this isn't a complicated, complex task. This is something that we can start to do today. So thank you for that, and I will stop sharing and pass over to Ivo to talk about an implementation.
Thank you, Rob. Trying to share screen, but so can you see my slides now? Thanks. So my name is Ivo Zandhuis. I'm a fellow at the International Institute of Social History and a freelance consultant in cultural heritage metadata things. And I was hired by a consortium of 3 institutes, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and the Netherlands Institute of Art History and the Kröller-Müller Museum, all joining forces to create one website on the work of Vincent van Gogh. And the project was called the Van Gogh Worldwide Project. So the task was to create a website on his work, and providing professional information as much as possible, as precise as possible, for professionals, professional art historians and curators interested in Van Gogh's work. So we wanted to present high-level data, high-quality data, and we wanted to create a search engine that would find an object precisely, both full text and with facets that we introduce on the website. Therefore, we wanted to collect data from the institutes that collected these artworks by Van Gogh, and collect data on the artworks itself, obviously, then the exhibitions, the literature where these works were mentioned, its provenance, and technical research like pictures of ranking lights or X-rays or reports on investigations that were done in a technical sense. In an earlier stage of the program, we were advised to use linked art, to study linked art as the thing to use to exchange the data into our platform. So the consortium hired 3 companies combining efforts to create the website, and Spink was the center piece in this, where they created the search engine. And they're specialists in linked data, so they know what they're doing in that sense. Collect all the data and create one API for Limoen Groen to create one website on top of that, designed by PurePixel. And last month we introduced the website, we launched it, and the Van Gogh Worldwide.org website was launched, and obviously we got a lot of attention, at least in the Netherlands and around. But the main thing that was interested in our idea was the use of the linked art model that we wanted to use. So there was 16, 17 participants eventually in the Netherlands that participated in providing data, and they provided the data in different ways. So the Van Gogh Museum itself had a programmer that was able to program an export from their collection management database into linked art that could be provided to Spink to put in the search engine. And obviously the Rijksmuseum was able to do that as well. So there was no problem there. We could just say, we want linked art. They said, okay, that's fine. And then created the linked art, and that was it. That was not the case for all institutions, obviously. 3 of them I was able to help to create the linked data for them. At least they export that from their databases, and I helped to create the software to do that. So I'm not a software developer, but I helped the software developers that were involved in these projects to do this, and checking whether they were using the linked art specifications correctly, and whether it was linked data, validating in all kinds of RDF validators. 4 museums were not able to deliver data as linked art at all. So we asked them to give us an export from their collection management system as a file, and they sent it us with email or whatever. And then we created the linked art for them and to put it in the system. And last but not least, there were several institutes with only 1 or 2 artworks that we asked to deliver the data. So they sent us an email with the data, and we entered that data into the National Art Register at the Netherlands Institute for Art History. And from there on, we could export it into linked art, obviously. So this way we could have over 1,100 artworks by Van Gogh from the collection management systems of 17 institutes. 2 institutes were able to provide us with a Sparkle endpoint even. So we were not able to use that in this stage of the project, but my personal endeavor is to help them create, to expand that and use that as an endpoint to extract data from their environment and then put it in our system. So what did we learn during the way we had some we constructed some ideas on how to do this and describe that in a documentation. We were very happy to have linked art. It helped us a lot because we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, we could have chosen to build our own ontology. We didn't, thank God. And we could have used CDOC-CRM purely, but then had to think about how to use that ontology. So linked art helped us to communicate how we wanted to have the data and think about the proper constructions to get it. We learned that most of the database had the right information in there. So if I a wild guess, but about 80% of the data and the data structures in the database was enough to convert it into linked data, into linked art. And so we had to add some, but then the amount of artworks, at least in the non-big museums, were fairly small. So we could ask them to put extra effort in creating more links into their collection management system to export it to linked art from there. No museum was able to provide us with linked JSON LD. So all the systems were based on a fairly old-fashioned XML-based web API. So they could transform their XML export into RDF XML that with an XSLT. That was a technique that they knew and that they could use to create the linked art. So therefore, I had to construct RDF XML examples from all the patterns that we wanted to introduce in our system. But then from there on, they could do their work. Following the requirements of the website, we had to introduce some additional requirements, and we introduced some relaxations from the point of view of linked art as well. And in the end, we needed a validating service, so we could ask somebody to create linked art and then upload it on a website and validate the information and see whether it was complying to the ideas we had on the requirements and relaxations that we had. And we base that on Shekel. So it's not, it could be more elaborate than it is now. So maybe we could expand that in the future. So what data requirements and relaxations did we need in linked art for now? We wanted to be sure that we spoke about the same Van Gogh artwork. So therefore we introduced our own standardized URI for every work that was cataloged in its in Van Gogh's oeuvre catalog. And you could, and we asked everybody to link their work to this canonical Van Gogh worldwide URI that we introduced, and we used the RDFC also property to do that. You had to introduce your current owner property, otherwise we couldn't see from which institute that the data was coming, and we wanted to present that on the website, obviously. So we needed an English title, otherwise you could not build an English website, and you needed a production event with artist, date, and place. And place was pretty important because we based the facet filtering of the periods in the work of Van Gogh on the place. And it turned out that a lot of the museums did not register that in their collection management system. So I had to introduce that. And we wanted to have an image. Some of them were sent to us by WeTransfer, others were available online, but never in the IIIF format that we wanted. Never, I guess. But then most of the times it didn't. We needed some extra additional concepts for typing what kind of a session number was used. So we had these, there are two important oeuvre catalogs, and the numbering in those systems we wanted to include. So we needed to have, and we had to distinguish those two, and therefore introduce those two typing concepts. It turned out that one of the partners was not correctly added in the ULAN database of the Getty, and that was one of the triggers to discuss whether we should use ULAN as a authority file for persons and institutions. And eventually we chose to use the RKD Artist authority file, which was from the National Institute of Art History in the Netherlands, because we could introduce all kinds of persons and institutions in there within 10 minutes and then add it to the website. That was a more convenient way to work, and we could have more precise information on persons and institutions that way. We used obviously the AAT and the TGN terms for other things in the linked art data, but then we allowed indirect linking. So it could be that an institute had its own URI to link a concept to an artwork, and then we could and then we allowed they could say this URI in their own system was had a SCOS exact match a relation with a AAT or TGN concept, and then things went well. We had to decide that people were not allowed to use blank notes. Sometimes people introduced the same exhibition to an artwork with a blank note, and at that point we could not see that those two exhibitions were the same exhibition anymore. So we asked them to create real URIs, no blank notes, for those exhibitions, and then could see that those two paintings were on the same exhibition.
Hi, I would just to let you know you've got a couple minutes left.
Okay, so that's only 2 slides, so that's okay, thanks. Yeah, so we had to explain our participants to use the thesauri. Ecce Artist was mainly introduced in most systems I encountered during this project already. So that was one important thing. But then AAT and TGN were less introduced there. But in the end, they got it. They knew why they had to do this. I explained, and they all were very enthusiastic to introduce that, only for the 7 or 8 Van Goghs first, but then maybe they'll go about and do the rest as well. I didn't convince them to put the time into their collection management system to comply to the XSD datetime data type. So I had to construct XSD datetime with the XSLT that we made, and I find that very. I'd rather have that in the system and not add something like that into in the code. And last but not least, we had a lot of discussion about the standardized vocabulary. So the ULAN Ecce Artist discussion was one of them. And then we had to decide which other authority file we had to trust, if not the Getty vocabulary, if we found that the Getty vocabulary would not be sufficient for our needs. So Ecce Artist is one of them, but then again, I don't think we could convince all museums around the world to introduce Ecce Artists URIs in their systems. So then we have to trust on the ULAN URIs. Anyway. So future plans, obviously, we learned that some of the linked art patterns were changed during the project. So I have to get back to that and then change the patterns. Especially provenance turned out to be different now than it was when we started. We want to connect more museums live, as a lot of the museums now send us export files, and we want to hook them up live. And I guess it's called Van Gogh Worldwide, but it's only Dutch museums now. So obviously we want other museums around the world to hook up and provide their data in linked art and join in. At this point, we don't align exhibitions and literature. So do we want to have so different institutions could refer to the same exhibition with a different URI. So we have to align those, and then again find a authority file to find the link. And IIIF is not very implemented yet in the Netherlands, at least. So that's one thing that we want to encourage and use as well. So that was the things I wanted to say. Thanks for your time, your interest.
Thank you, Ivo. That was great. Are there any questions for any of the speakers, actually? I see a few in the chat, and for those who can't read the chat, maybe I'll start there to get us started. So there was a question about the difference, going back to the very beginning of the chat thread. There was a question about the difference between linked art and Lido. And I don't know if, Rob, you want to take that question?
Sure, yep. So my experience is that Lido is XML based, but built on top of the same core model of CRM. So it has the notion of events, and it has objects and so forth. But it's not itself a graph. It's a lightweight description of objects, and it's not a lightweight description of people. It's a lightweight description of objects. So I think there's a difference in scope as well as a difference in format. And in the chat, Gudrun said that there should be an RDF representation available for Lido in the future, which I think would be great. because there's the difficulty really is translating between conceptual models, not between different formats that describe the same underlying model. So it's relatively straightforward today to translate between Lido and LinkedArt, or similarly from LinkedArt to Lido. And what's needed is the tool chain to do that, and the profiles for what the data means in those formats, which is where I think LinkedArt will help in terms of the domain, rather than just a more general, here is a format in which you can put data. And then perhaps I'll read the next one. Then Angela asks, did any collection involved in the Van Gogh Worldwide project provide data that had a focus that could not be mapped into linked data right away, such as detailed provenance information or commissioning events, that sort of thing?
So that's the provenance information has two ways of representing. So you could have the event-based way of modeling that. So then you model the events that changes, that models the change of ownership from one party to the other, or you model the party and the period in which this party has the object. So and both ways of modeling are introduced in the collection management system. So you had to calculate the one into the other if you want to use that, but it was doable. There's no way, there was no other example that I can think of that was difficult to calculate.
And Goran asks, it is kind of an aggregation of linked open data. Have you thought about a federated search approach? So at the linked, I think there's two different levels for this, one at the Van Gogh level and one at the LinkedArt level. So I'll answer for LinkedArt first. So LinkedArt has, or is working on, I should say, more of a REST-based API where you ask for the description and you get the description. So we want it to be as simple as possible to implement, so that we get as much implementation as possible. One of the things that we see with things like federated search, be that via federated SPARQL or other techniques, is that it very quickly leaves people behind. That if you cannot participate at that federated layer, then you don't try to participate at any other layer. Whereas we want instead to enable institutions to do what they can when they can, particularly in this current pandemic environment, and see benefit for that straight away. So we are looking at enabling aggregators to aggregate content, and if institutions want to provide SPARQL endpoints or other sophisticated APIs for interacting with their data, that's wonderful, and aggregators and other partners can use those, but it's not that they are required to participate. But Eva, would you like to speak to the?
Yeah, it's the same here. So eventually there were only two institutions that could participate with a SPARQL endpoint. So all the others, yeah, we had to use REST APIs, and then they would all be different. So then we had to have components that translated the R-LinkedArt question into their API. So that would be more complicated. So yes, eventually, at some point in the future, we hope that we don't have to aggregate data, and then could do a federated query. But for at least a couple of years, I don't believe that will be possible to do.
And maybe we'll take one last question before we transition over to the second half of the session. And this one is coming from John McQuaid about exhibitions. Working with the same exhibition described differently. could a potential fix for that be applied to the medium? Yeah, it's a question that came in last in the chat.
Yeah, I read it. So yeah, so it could be possible that an exhibition by one institute is described differently than the exhibition provided by another institute, and then we have to, well, guess whether it's is the same exhibition. So that's the reason why we want to introduce a authority URI for them to introduce in their system, and then provide us with that disambiguation URI. I don't see could a potential fix for that be applied to the medium. I don't understand it, that example. Maybe Rob, do you?
I wasn't immediately clear about that either, I'm afraid.
Maybe if John is still on the line, he can ask his question live. That might be easier.
If you want.
Maybe we can tackle that in the second half of the session, isn't it? Since Rob, you are actually going to demo live data modeling with data from the Rijksmuseum. So we're very excited about that. So hosting powers over to you again, huh?
Mm-hmm. And Edward, if you would like to go first, just to sort of introduce the object,
sure.
And then we'll look at how it gets turned into like that.
Hi everyone, I'm Edward Anderson. I work at the Rijksmuseum. I'm a data manager. I'm responsible for the kind of ETL data pipelines that we have between our CMS and various other systems. And today we're going to be talking about an object, which I'm posting the URI for in the chat right now. I might post a couple of different links. There's a kind of emerging theme about our various linked art demos, is that a lot of them are centered around the work of Georgia O'Keeffe. As a museum predominantly responsible for the preservation of 17th century Dutch artworks, we don't have any Georgia O'Keeffes, but we do have some photographs by her husband, Alfred Stieglitz. So as a kind of meta graph connection there, this is our like extension of a linked art demo. If your URI doesn't automatically dereference to the English version of our website, I'll just also share the English one. And for those who would much rather look at data than images, for you, a special gift of our Lido representation of the public data on that object as well. Cool.
Great. Okay, so we thought that it would be interesting to look at how to go from something that you can see on the web, either as a human with the collection view, or as a machine with the Lido view, into the model, and then we don't have an automated way of going from a diagram to JSON-LD. That would be super cool. But you could easily imagine what it would look like as data. So before we get started on that, just some brief notes about the profile. So for folks who are interested or familiar with CRM, again, you'll note that we do not use the E and P with numbers in it, and we've sort of shortened some of the names and completely renamed some of them. This is an attempt to make the format, so the JSON-LD, a bit more usable to developers. And hence, when we talk through this this example, we'll use those names for the properties, but it's easy, trivial, in fact, to translate from the names that we use in JSON through to the actual properties and classes. We also don't use any of the more powerful tools in the CRM toolbox, such as multiple instantiation, because it's much easier to implement if you only have a limited selection of tools, and we've simply found that we didn't need multiple instantiation or any of the more powerful tricks in order to get the job done. So Einstein is famously quoted as saying, as simple as possible, but no simpler. So do only that which you need to do, but if you need to do it, then you need to do it. So we haven't needed to use multiple instantiation, and so we haven't. There also aren't properties on properties. That creates additional headaches and confusion. We've tried to pick the domain and range and which direction the relationship should go. And there's an aspiration, which we stick to as much as we can, to do things exactly one way rather than having multiple ways of doing the same thing. So sometimes we have to allow multiple ways of doing the same thing just because the data only fits into two different patterns. But by and large, it is the exception to have exceptions rather than the norm. So with that, for folks who are familiar with CRM, this may look a little bit different. I assure you it's trivial to go from what you see will see in the diagram to the CRM that you're familiar with. So I will share my screen. And I have a pattern library off to the side that I'll be dragging things into this currently blank slate. So Edward, would you like to pick out the first bit of the record to?
Okay, well, I guess the first thing is you land on a web page and you have a image of a photographic print in front of you.
Mm-hmm. So the thing that we're talking about is the photograph itself.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes.
Being a human-made object. So we can give that a class, which is, I won't put classes on everything because the names on the little bubbles are descriptive of the class. But this would be a human-made object, and we were very grateful to the CRM folks, the SIG, for adopting human-made in version 7 rather than the previous man-made, which is a little bit more of a gendered, unnecessarily gendered term in English, though of course less so in other languages. We would also, as we had in the first example, we can have labels associated with everything. And these are primarily for someone looking at the data rather than a machine. So, or an end user for that matter. So we prefix it with an underscore just to make it a little bit more obvious that this is something that is there if you're looking at the JSON and not to display directly to the user. So Edward, what's the name of, what would be a useful term for the object so that we knew what it was? The portrait van Catherine Stieglitz. And you may be muted.
Yeah, it looks like that's the title for the object.
Yep. Did Edward, are you there still?
I'm not seeing him on the list of panelists anymore.
Maybe lost connection.
Yeah.
Well, we can see the data, so I will continue. Hugh, he is back. Welcome back.
Sorry, I had technical problems.
No problem. So we put on the label and the type. What else is there? We could maybe work down the list in the object data.
Sure. So the object has a title. In fact, it has two. We have a title for it in Dutch and a title. Well, I say, no, maybe we only have one. It is in Dutch.
So for the title, we would use the name pattern, and because it's a pattern, we can just simply drop the pattern onto the object. So names, or E33, E41 linguistic appellations, have three core properties. They can have a language. So I guess we're looking at the English version.
We're looking at the Dutch one, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yep. And then it will be classified as the primary name. And it has some content, which I guess is otherwise
the same as the label. Yes.
Yep. And then you could duplicate exactly this with English to have multiple names in different languages. And if there are questions, please do put them into the chat so that we can address them as we're going. Maybe this is all super obvious and easy, but if there's anything that stands out as being interesting or confusing, please do just shout out or indeed put it into the chat, and we can address them as we go. So the next type would be next bit would be the object type, I imagine,
Correct.
of a photograph.
It is a photograph. We don't have a URI for that, so we would want to map to the AAT one.
Yep. So this is then a link out to a vocabulary. So it would be whatever the AAT number for photograph is. And while in CRM it is P2 has type, we had to relabel that in the JSON-LD because the label on this arc is type. And we thought it would be too confusing to have both type and has type, one of which goes to a class and the other one goes to an instance of a type or concept. So instead, we thought classified as is probably a better, a more usable, more understandable label for this particular arc. But underneath it is just P2 has type.
So we have an accession number for this object. We call it an object number, which is a like alphanumeric text string.
Yep. And as one can imagine, identifiers are that same pattern. And I've included all of the information here, all of the structure. So it's an identifier and it has a string PF F17653. So F17653. And what sort of identifier is it? it's an accession number. So
Yes.
again, we'd have AAT accession number. To distinguish it from other sorts of identifiers. But because the same object could have been accessioned into different organizations over time, we might want to say that this identifier was assigned by a particular institution, the Rijksmuseum. So it's the Rijksmuseum's accession number, or this identifier, which is an accession number, was assigned by an activity, and hence we're getting into this event centricity, which the assignment of that identifier was carried out by the Rijksmuseum. And similarly, a different accession number would still have the same accession number concept, but would be assigned by a different organization.
So we have some creation event metadata, and I don't know how deep we want to go in or how explicit we need to be or can be about the data that we provide, but the photograph was made by Alfred Stieglitz in 1905. I don't know whether I can tell you whether the exact print that we look after was, or whether Stieglitz made that print himself or somebody else did on a negative that he had shot.
Yep. So let's connect. So here is again the basic activity pattern, and in this case it's production. So we'll connect it to the object. It is not just any old activity, it is a production activity. And the relationship from the object to the production is produced by. So that is in linked art a choice that we have made, that the direction should be from the object to the production with produced by, rather than from the production to the object with produced. The reason for that is in looking at the data in our various systems, of course, most existing systems are object-centric rather than event-centric. So there's often an identifier, or more than one identifier, many identifiers for objects, but very rarely is there an identifier for the production of the object. Because the object is only ever produced once, there is a one-to-one relationship between these two things. So in terms of what information you would get when you asked for the object, you get the object, all of this information, and the production along with it. So hence, we've made some choices. We've tried to make it as consistent as possible internally, but at the expense of losing some of the flexibility that we get with CRM. So we can say that the object was produced, we can say that it's by Stieglitz.
Correct.
And we can skip over the fact that it is a print, e.g., it's a photograph. But if we wanted to say that it was produced using a negative, that is a very, of course, common pattern. So we could have a pointer over to another object, which would be, in this case, the negative. And I'll put this in temporarily, but I'll take it out again. So we're just using the existing, very commonly used property or relationship, use specific object. So this activity is carried out by Stieglitz or whoever printed the photograph. It could be classified as photograph printing. So this is called printing. And it used a specific object being the negative of the film. So then we need the time.
Yes, it was made in 1905.
Okay. So again, time is one of these very common patterns that is used everywhere. And we could have said that the attribute assignment was occurred at a certain time, and probably when it was accessioned, but that's not in the record so far. So CRM has a notion of a time span. We could also give it a capital S because it's 2 words, which has the beginning of the earliest possible date and the latest possible date, and then also the latest possible beginning and the earliest possible end of those of the range. So if it was in 1905, then the beginning would be the 1st of January at midnight 1905, and the end, clarified in the most recent CRM SIG, would be, and not up to date in the website, I hasten to admit, would be the very last second of 1905. In the linked out site, you'll see 1906, 0101, 000000. So you would only be wrong by a second if you're doing it the current way. One thing that we have found, though, is that when producing websites or human intended representations, that the date should be displayed as 1905, that we don't want to say it occurred sometime from the very first second of 1905 through to the very last second of 1905. So in order to be as flexible as possible with that, we assign a name to the time span with identified by, which gets a little bit confusing. Apologies for that. This time span has a name, which is a display name. So the name is intended for displaying to end users, and the content of that name is just 1905. So now, as a consuming application, if what you are trying to do is render to a human, all you need to do is pick out that 1905 content and put that for the human. If what you're doing is building a search engine and you want to say what happened at some point during 1905, then you would use this more data-oriented view of the same content. So in one pattern, we can now serve 2 audiences without reproducing all of the knowledge in multiple different ways.
So we have some metadata describing the physicality of the object. It is printed on paper, or it is made of paper.
Yep.
And we have 2 sets of dimensions, one describing the physical space of the paper, and the other the size of the image within.
So materials types like primariness or displayness or that sort of thing. But instead of being classifications, I think they made a copy, yep. Instead of being classifications, they are related by a different property, which in CRM, I believe is composed of, but we renamed it, much like classified as, to be made of, just to be a bit more obvious as to what is going on. So the physical object is made of paper, and that could be repeated as many times as you want. If it was a more interesting decorative arts object, it could be made of gold and silver and oak and etc. So then the measurements, so we can do the 2 different forms. There's the descriptive form. Let me just move this out of the way a little bit, which of course is a common pattern, where the full text is described as a linguistic object. So I'll drop that pattern in up here. And again, this follows exactly the same. It's a bit wide. the same sort of pattern as for identifiers and names. Down to that. So the object is referred to by an assertion, a text, a linguistic object, which is in, well, it doesn't really matter. I guess H and W are English, or is it the same in Dutch?
H and D, H and B, sorry. EFO should be helping me.
Yeah. So 207 by 169. I'm at least
So
looking.
that's the shape of the image content inside. The piece of paper is 302 by 210.
Sorry. Yep. So H302. MXW210 Right. So if you were not familiar with conventions, then that would not tell you much. And we'll get to how a machine can understand that in a second. But this is then, we need to know what sort of text this is in order to build an interesting interface. So remember, of course, we want to say this is measurements. So we would say this is a measurement statement. However, because this type is infinitely extensible, you could have many different sorts of statements about things. We then introduce a meta type to say that this type has a type and it is what sort of text it is. So this is fixed, and then there can be many of these. So this gives us another pattern whereby we can make it easier for consuming applications and consuming developers to understand what's going on by having fixed points, regardless of what the vocabularies are used here. So if you had a statement that was not one of the ones that are commonly used, then an application, if it saw this type of text, would at least be able to sort of throw up the label for it and the content. And a human user would be able to understand what's going on, even if the system didn't know what, let's say, provenance statement was meaning. So, however, if we wanted to be able to search using those dimensions, sure would be nice if they were expressed as data rather than as text, because parsing out H302mm from that string would be painful. Just move over here. So there is a structure for dimensions, which has this tripartite value. It's got the actual numeric value. And in CRM, the value of dimensions can be anything, including strings. In linked art, we reduce that functionality to be only numbers. They can be floating points or they can be integers, but they have to be numbers. You can't put a string in there. We would then use AT millimeters as the unit, and it's classified as the height. Burke asks in the chat, is there any concept of order in case there are multiple similar properties, like an object being made primarily out of one material, but also of another, and can such a hierarchy be preserved? So technically, no. If you had 5 different measurement statements, because it's a graph, they all simply relate the object and the statement. And there's no sort of, in the structure, there isn't a way of saying this is the primary one. However, at the ontology, at the vocabulary layer, we have these guys, primary. So the object is identified by a name, in Dutch, portrait van Kaplan Stieglitz, which is classified as the primary name. It might have another name which was not primary, which could be a photograph of the wife of the photographer, which is not a good name, clearly, because it doesn't name the person in the photograph. So in that case, it wouldn't be the primary name. And well, let's just change the second one, right? So portrait of wife of Stieglitz, a terrible, terrible name. And then that would be alternate. So instead of having an order, we simply have a more binary distinction of primariness and non-primariness. If there is a real order of things, such as, it's mostly oak with then some silver and then little bits of diamond, we can't deal with that in the current patterns. But it's a great question, and one that comes up frequently. It's a challenge of the graph structure or graph model, underlying model, that it does not preserve order. One approach that some folks have taken, it's not official, but it's certainly useful, is in the serialization in the JSON to put them in the right order, such that the primary ones are first and then following on to alternate ones and so forth, because the naive user interface won't process it as a graph. It will simply process it in the order that it sees it, and hence it will put them in the correct order for the human, even if that is a side effect of the JSON rather than the actual model.
Do you want to do the other dimensions? Or do you want another data type?
Well, we've done dimensions, so let's go on and look at some of the.
Okay, so the photograph has some subject. It is a photograph of his daughter Catherine, and also we have a statement from icon class that a woman is depicted.
Yep, that's right. Let me just
dig out the code for that.
So here is one of the interesting and core differences between linked art and CRM and some other existing patterns, which is that we separate out the physical object from the image or textual content that it is carrying. Because especially for photographs, there could be many photographs, each of which show exactly the same image. So there's no point having one newly cataloged piece of image content for each copy of the photograph, when in a graph, we can refer to that's the same image many times. So that is an information object and indeed a visual item. And I'm starting this over here because, let me just briefly zoom out. All of this information that we've done so far comes in a package. So all of this, despite whether it's got internal identifiers or links externally, this data will come when you ask for the object record. So this is one API endpoint, essentially. You'll get all of this. But because there can be multiple objects, each of which refers to the same visual or textual content, the description of the visual content is separate. So instead, you would ask for the objects record. You would then follow a link to the description of the image or the text or the audio, when we get to audio in CRM, that the object bears. And we'll see this as being also important when we get to digital. Well, let's just throw in digital now anyway, because the digital object also shows that same image. And clearly there can be many, many digital objects, each of which shows the image, same image as the object. So hence this split which is maybe less familiar to folks. Okay, so here we are at the visual item. We would also give it a class visual item. We would want to give it a label, image of, shown by the portrait of Catherine Stieglitz, but we'll skip over them. So it then the image represents a person being Stieglitz. And of course, it's not Stieglitz the father, but Stieglitz the daughter.
And we have the icon class code 61BB2.
Yep. So, okay, Stieglitz. And visual items can represent anything. So it could represent a person, it could represent another object, it can even represent conceptual things. However, the woman one is a subject. It's about historical people. Or there is in linked art another property which is not present in CRM, at least in 6.7. I forget whether we had it in 7 or not, which is represents entity of type. A little bit of a mouthful, but essentially images can represent entities. So this is the Catherine Stieglitz. But if we don't know who it is, if we just knew that there was a woman depicted, we would say it represents an entity of type woman. So it would, when you've got the subject of historical person's woman, is it about a woman or is it depicting an entity of type woman?
We have it in a Lido subject wrap.
Right. Okay. So it would be more of the aboutness. But it could just be a different a difference of the various ontologies that's simply not possible to differentiate between the two in Lido. But yeah, let's do about for now. It looks like we're down to acquisition.
Yeah, we acquired the photograph in 1994.
Mm-hmm. So an easy thing to say, but as rights are involved, and there is a lot of interest in understanding the history of objects, much like visual content is separate and digital objects are separate. Provenance activities are also separate in linked art. So let me just move these guys down out of the way a little bit. So in linked art, because there's different types of things which happen during provenance events, the object could be acquired, e.g. the rights, the ownership rights are transferred between organizations or between actors. The object is often physically, but not always moved. If you acquire a painting, probably you're going to want to put it in your museum. If you acquire a 10-ton statue, maybe you just leave it where it is, and hence there wouldn't be a move. You also probably acquire custody, legal and physical. So rather than multiple instantiation, which is confusing and complicated to implement, instead we use the CRM pattern of partitioning. So there is a provenance activity overall, and it has multiple parts. In this case, the one that we are interested in is the acquisition of ownership, or the acquisition, which is the transfer of ownership. So it transfers title to the Rijksmuseum.
And we don't publish who it was
Who you
transferred
got it from.
but we almost certainly will have that data.
Yep. So in the back end, this may be available, but not for public consumption. Again, we can reuse this same. I just grab that template. Time span pattern to say when the acquisition occurred. And because the different parts of the provenance might have occurred at different times, and we only want one way to do it if at all possible, we'll attach it to the acquisition rather than the sort of wrapper activity. And you acquired it in 1994, which is sometime between the very first second and the very last second of the year. And because we want to be nice to consuming interfaces, we'll put 1994 as a display name for it. So provenance activity is just an E7 activity. It's got a classification hanging off of it, which is provenance. So that when you encounter this thing, you know that it's a provenance activity without having to look at the different parts and saying, okay, there's an acquisition as part of it, so it's probably a provenance activity. No, it's explicitly one. Emmanuel, how are we doing for time?
We have 13 minutes left.
Are there any questions? Would people like us to?
Question, yeah. About the order or about materials, and if one is the primary material over others, is there a way to keep that hierarchy?
Yep. Yeah, I answered that one already when I saw it come up. But yeah, briefly, not directly in the format. We use the sort of primary and alternate pattern. Or in the serialization, we can have order because you need to write things down in a particular order, but it's not encoded directly in the graph. Graphs with ordering are immensely complicated, and the sort of bipartite primary alternate structure, which you can apply to many different things, seems to work just as well for the use cases that we've run into at the very least. Are there any other questions? Prefer to leave time for discussion rather than more mapping performance art. Feel free to unmute. Can people just directly unmute? Or raise your hand if that's easier. Descriptive materials and techniques can be handled like measurements. Yes, exactly correct. So we said that it was made of paper, but we could very easily have used a material statement instead of measurement statement. So we would simply take this, put it over here, and relink it. Apologies for the mock crossing lines. So the statement might be printed on photographic paper, which a human would be quite capable of understanding, but a machine is more likely to want to know that the object was made of this identified thing, paper. Can you link particular material and technique applied to the material? Oh, so the paper was printed, but well, that's not, it's a bit hard to do with a photograph when there's only one material. The silver was inlaid and the oak is the main structure. What about a painting? A frame is made of oak and the support is made of canvas. Is that, and then the canvas is painted on. Is that the use case? Or is that a reasonable facsimile of the use case? If so, then yes, because we follow partitioning. So let's do the support. So we would say there is an object, which is still a human-made object, which is part of this one. So this object has this object, and this object is, I'm going to really, well, let's say it's a framed photograph. And this is the frame because the rest of it's paper. So the frame is made of oak. And it is a frame. So made of oak, classified as frame. Carving is the tech applied to marble. Oh, so let's say that the oak is carved. That's an interesting one. So then, because the carving is an activity, we would need to talk about the production of the frame. So the frame is produced by a production, and the production has a particular technique, which is carving. So in the same way that the production is classified as printing over here, this production would be classified as carving. There we go, that's a good question, thank you. Yeah, and it brings up this the split that we have, that we've already used, that we want to be as consistent as possible in our approach to things so that people aren't surprised when they see particular properties. So in the same way that we've partitioned the activity, all of the different parts of provenance, one of which is acquisition, there might be different parts to the object, one of which is the frame, which is made of oak. And now, oh look, you could repeat all of these different things. You know, the frame has dimensions, the frame has statements about it, the frame might have an identifier, it certainly has a classified as, it's got made of, it's got produced by, and so on. So by then, then we can sort of draw some boxes around things, which let me just quickly do that, to say, here is something that you would get all of this in one representation. So you would, when you request the provenance activity, you would get all of that data. But you wouldn't get all of this, even though it's the transfer of ownership of this object. When you request the frame, you would only get the information about the frame because it is itself a thing. And it could be referred to from other objects as well, right? You could have a collection of interesting oak frames. People, all of the people and actors generally are separate representations. Yes. You don't embed all of the information about the Rijksmuseum in the provenance, otherwise it would get very, very, very messy. The visual item, again, is a separate representation. So you'd get back this bit, oops, sorry, that bit. And the digital objects are separate as well because they might be referred to for multiple things. They could depict multiple objects. And then there'd be more information about the digital object. It's a AAAF image, it's CC0, it's this many pixels high or this many pixels wide, and so on and so forth. And then all the rest of this that I didn't draw a box around, that's the sort of the core object record that you get back when you dereference the object. Yes, and as Manuel says in the chat, please, if you would like to do this sort of activity with your data, please do come along on to our Wednesday session at 4:15, because that's exactly what we would like to do. Edward and I have talked about this one already, so we knew we pre-selected one to have a good range of information, but one that is pretty a set of use cases that are pretty common. So if you would like to do it and see us do this sight unseen, we would be super happy to help out. And also we have mapping calls every other Wednesday at 11 Eastern, which is 4 p.m. in the UK, 5 p.m. in Europe, to which people would be very welcome to bring their examples and questions and use cases. And on the other Wednesday at the same time, we go into more of the interesting questions that often arise from those mapping exercises, such as, in this case, we talked about title on object. How do you make it clear that the name Portrait Van Catherine Stieglitz is actually written on the object, in this case on the back? So we talked about how to model that. Was there another question?
And I might just briefly add that probably the easiest way for people to join both of those calls, the mapping one and the modeling one, is probably to get on the LinkedArt mailing list. It's fairly low traffic. You can find the details on the LinkedArt website, and an agenda reminding people that those calls are coming up, along with the connection details, always comes through on those lists.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we try to give at least a day or two's notice for the agenda. Sometimes we don't make that and it's the same day, but it's always the same Zoom call. I'll stop sharing. Any other questions or comments or thoughts from anyone? I see that some folks have had to leave, but thank you for staying with us. I hope it was useful and interesting.
Thank you very much.
Maybe let's recap just one more time that the next LinkedArt session will be tomorrow at 4:15 for an hour. And that's very much a joint working group meeting with the CRM colleagues, which will be a little bit more of a discussion. Please join in. This will very much be kind of a meet and greet session, as well as, talking about issues that are relevant for both working groups. We want to work in collaboration, as we've done so far. So that's the plan for tomorrow. And then, as I've mentioned in the chat, there will be another LinkedArt mapping session on Wednesday at 4:15 again. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for our speakers. That was great. And this will be available on the web very soon, on the CDOC website, as well as the LinkedArt website, I'm sure.